Say one thing about Susana Martinez, she certainly doesn't appear to be afraid of a fight, but after a gritty election season, is that all that's left for the governor and lawmakers to do when they convene at the Roundhouse in January? So here to hash it out, former chairman of the Democratic Party of New Mexico, John Wertheim, Jamie Estrada, former Commerce Department official and one of our regulars, former New Mexico House Republican Whip Daniel Foley is here, and Tripp Jennings of the journalistic venture New Mexico in Depth. Now, Tripp, your sense of how lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, looking back, are going to view this race. Classically, and Michael Sanchez actually is saying this too, we can move forward, we can find ways to serve New Mexico, but we're talking about human beings here, and not just human beings, politicians.
You know, we're talking about human beings.
People that don't
forget. We're
forget.
talking about a state capital, and this is a very relational place. You know, when I covered another state capital, the analogy was always like, this is a big high school. You know, you got a bunch of people who are really watching each other, and people are grinning and smiling because they know it's true.
Sure.
So when a governor goes after opposing party's majority leader, takes out two of the Senate president and then the Senate whip, Democratic whip, I think that's going to send a message. I don't know what the message is going to be. We're talking about a bunch of human beings in one place. Will that send a message to the Democrats that we can't trust her and we're going to be obstructionists?
Because they were so helpful before this.
Or are we scared? Because actually lawmakers do understand. I'll tell you another thing.
Please.
Power, people understand power in the state capitol.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that translates.
That's a very interesting point there, Jamie, because when you think about Governor Richardson, he wielded power, sometimes with a nail at the end of a stick, you know what I'm saying? Just one of those kind of things. And sometimes that works, and sometimes, you know, people can come around, so to speak, depending. But all these things are situational, right? It's every different vote. Committees, committee chairs, committee heads. It's a lot of loops to go through before you get to something landing on the governor's desk. So this could be interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, this election really was her midterm, right? So in some respects, you've seen the analysis coming from the Las Cruces Sun News. I read their editorial page this weekend, and it says, hey, that she was badly beaten and bruised out of this election because, you know, her stated goal was to take over the House of Representatives, not so much do some damage to the leadership in the Senate, but really the goal of these PACs were to really take control of the House because that's where they really felt the opportunity was, and it actually got worse by at least 2, maybe 3 by the time we're done with this whole thing. So I think that the Democrats might actually see this as an opportunity to say, hey, we have more of a mandate here to push our agenda, and we're not going to cooperate. Now, if they do that, I think that's going to be sad for New Mexico, because I think that people still, you know, even though they voted for divided government here, at the end of the day, we need to get something done. We need to get something done about our competitiveness, about jobs. These are the things people care about. I think that the election that was run in this term was about, you know, driver's licenses and other things that, frankly, yeah, people agree with. Those aren't the things that really are on people's minds.
You know, and John, it's interesting when you think about, you know, the hands of who's holding a good hand, a strong hand. Are Democrats holding as strong a hand as folks might think, or is it going to be many, many more challenges that might be ahead? Considering the governor has a lot of strong things she can do. She can set the agenda, she can set the tone with an opening day speech at the legislative session. She can talk about expectations. You can basically put people on the wrong side of an issue if you play this correctly. So for Democrats, there's a lot of challenges here.
Well, I mean, she's still the governor, so of course that's a huge challenge. But at the end of the day, this midterm election, as Jamie is saying, was a big problem for her. I mean, the House, the Democrats' hand in the House has gotten strengthened, and we're looking at a probable new Speaker of the House in Kenny Martinez, who is a really smart and able policymaker. Now, I think that both the Democratic leaders, Michael Sanchez in the Senate, Kenny Martinez is probably going to be the Speaker in the House of Representatives. Both gentlemen are very smart. They are very policy-oriented. They're kind of policy wonks. So I actually think the Democrats are going to take the statesman's route. And there is going to be some compromise legislation. There's going to be talk about jobs and building the economy and economic development. And the question is the governor willing to kind of meet the Democrats halfway? If she's not, then we're going to be in a kind of a stalemate because the Democrats have firm control of the legislature still. If, on the other hand, she's willing to compromise, then I think we can have an episode of progress for the state. And I'm hopeful that, I'm confident that both Michael Sanchez and Kenny Martinez will rise to the occasion. I'm hopeful that the governor will rise to the
But,
occasion.
does she actually have to compromise? That's what I'm getting at here. Does she? I mean, I'm
Well,
looking at
if she
this
wants to
thinking,
get anything
you know,
done, she can. I mean, there's the one branch of government. She can't do it as solely the executive. And plus, I think the issues that she's chosen to run on, things like driver's license for immigrants, things like this social retention issue in the schools, these are not the burning issues. What the burning issues are out of this election are things like the minimum wage that won big time in Albuquerque because people are hurting. They want good jobs at good wages. So she can talk about these kind of micro issues that she thinks she has an advantage on, but it's a waste of time. She needs to focus on things like jobs, jobs, and jobs.
I hear you.
That's what she needs to focus
Daniel, your thought on this? Does she have to compromise to get
Well,
what she needs
I
done?
think it depends on what her goal is.
Okay.
I mean, if her goal is to compromise, then yes, she's got to compromise. If she wants to try to get something meaningless through that's going to be watered down, then yes, but I don't think that's what she was elected to do. I think the bigger tone in this whole conversation that I found interesting during this election is the disrespect for the first female Hispanic governor in the state of New Mexico. The bloggers and everybody talking about this shadow government over here. You know, oh, it's got to be these white guys running government. It can't be Susana Martinez. She's not smart enough to be making these decisions. And I think anybody that knows Susana Martinez knows she's making these decisions. She openly put her name on this stuff
That's
to go
the
after these
opinion
folks.
of one blogger, though. when you
Well,
think
it's the
about it.
opinion of a lot of folks, I think, and that's the opinion that they want to try to, they kind of want to keep moving forward. And I think it's a shame. I think Kenny Martinez is clearly going to be an able speaker. Him and Michael Sanchez are very good friends. So we may, for the first time, have Democrat leaders in both houses that actually get along and will work together. That could pose a problem for her. I disagree that it's about all these micro issues. I think that those are bigger issues. I think people do care about, as we're moving towards the CLEAR Act and we're moving towards our driver's license not being accepted, those are things that are going to rise to the level of interest for people. I do think that Jamie's 100% wrong on the governor took a shellacking this time. We've never performed well as Republicans in a presidential year. That's always our worst time in this state. We perform so much better when the governor's running in New Mexico, but yet she pretty much held her own and picked up some seats in the House. So I think had she not raised the money she raised in the Senate, had she not raised the money that she's raised, we would have had $2.7 million of out-of-state union dollars, and she would have been shellacked. I think that she kept the ball kind of even right now. We lost a few seats, possibly 2 or 3 seats in the House, but we picked up those seats in the Senate. So
She
I
even
think
lost the DA
I
slot
think
in
it's.
Doñana County. That
Doñana-
was where her political base was, and now
But
it's in
Doñana County
Democratic
doesn't
hands.
vote for Pierce. Doñana County is not a Republican place. So, I mean, that's like saying, you know, that we have a Republican that came, you know, Dave Cargo comes from up in Tierra Maria, and oh my gosh, he doesn't win up there. So, I mean, these are not strong Republican places. I think at the end of the day, and I've said it till I'm blue in the face on this show, is that, you know, legislators understand 2 things, and they hate 2 things. They hate bad press. And they hate a well-funded opponent. And Susana Martinez has shown that she will put money where her mouth is and get involved in races, whether they're Democrat primaries or general election races. So I think from her standpoint, you know, I think that she's going to have to decide in 2 years what she wants to be judged on.
That's
Does
where
she
I
want to be
that's where I
judged
want to
on?
get right now. Because, Tripp, I want to ask you this. What John just brought up, jobs, jobs, jobs. Those are the 3 words right now. Laura Sanchez on election night, our colleague, sat here and said, look, the gubernatorial race is now officially on. Now that we've got some clarity on where the House is at and where the Senate is at, it seems to me she now has to take a turn, as Jamie mentioned, and has to be about a record of accomplishment if she wants to get reelected now.
I think it's clear that, and the reason I asked about, you know, whether Democrats are going to be obstructionist is, are there Democrats out there talking right now about we're not going to give her a thing over the next 2 years? Yeah, I think that's probably happening, not behind closed doors. I also want to say, and this is borrowing a colloquialism from where I'm from, but when you're, you know, out hunting and you go hunting for bear, you want to kill the bear because you're going to have an angry bear on your hands if you don't kill the bear. Now, what I mean by that is Michael Sanchez is still in the Senate. He still controls the pipeline in the Senate. You've got a strengthened House with Democrats. Really the question is going to, one of the questions I think in the session is she going to compromise more? What is the goal, actually? I think you asked the goal. Is it for solutions? Is it a fight? This is going to be a really interesting session for people like me who follow this.
So what happens if Democrats, you know, we know there's a jobs plan coming from Democrats, we know there's other things coming from Democrats. There are things that she's going to have to consider as well, not just things that she wants to do. So if there's a priorities issue here, it seems to me the wrestling match is going to be about priorities for the state, and someone's going to have to put it up or shut it up, as they say.
Well, it's going to be
about
along
this kind of
politics, policy, all these lines. Also, state capitals are very relational places. I don't like this guy, I don't like this woman. That kind of stuff plays into it as well. That's why I think it's going to be a very interesting session.
Sure, absolutely.
I think what's interesting about this going into the next 2 years is that, you know, if we don't start to show job growth or economic growth in New Mexico, and particularly in central New Mexico, then I think that it's going to be very difficult. I mean, honestly, the Democrats have to come up with somebody.
Sure.
But the reality is, I think there's a lot of Republican governors around the country who are showing that they can grow their own economies, bucking the national trend. You know, Ohio, I'm pointing to Wisconsin a little bit here. You know, have governors that have used their political capital to move, you know, really conservative ideas across, and they're starting to grow their economies. We can't claim that here in New Mexico. Yeah, we have a low unemployment rate, but we all know that the unemployment rate is just a terrible measure of where our economy is really headed. You have to measure this by how many jobs we're losing. You know, is the administration right in saying that we're too dependent on federal jobs? Absolutely. So therefore, the legislature and the governor have to come together, I think, and figure out what is our competitiveness agenda. And there's, you know, bipartisan ideas that have to be put on the table. It's not just about tax cuts, which I think are a part of what needs to get done. It's got to be other stuff too.
I appreciate you saying that. And I want you to bounce off that, Dan, if you would, because again, it just seems like what the governor has been proposing or talking about thus far on this jobs issue is kind of thin. There's just not much there. And these issues that John, you know, his opinion of whether they're, you know, relevant or not is beside the point if it's about jobs. What does she have to do to talk about jobs between now and the legislative session?
Well, I think our state, you know, regardless of who the governor is, and we've talked about this before, we've talked about it off camera, I think our state has to decide what our identity is.
Okay.
I mean, for so long we've been a federal government state. We've been the labs.
Is
we've
she
been
the
bases.
personality to lead us to the promised
I don't know.
land?
That's
This is
the
what I'm
million-dollar
asking.
question. Because I mean, when we make this change,
Yeah.
it's not going to be, you know, this is going to be like quitting cold turkey. You're going to have to either say we're going to keep going in that direction or we're going to go in a different direction. I think we're seeing some movement. They're not in high-paying jobs, but the call centers, things that are coming here. But, you know, when you start talking about jobs at that level, there's so many undercurrents of policy decisions that have to be made, whether it's, are we going to be right to work, not right to work? Are we going to give unions a say in collective bargaining, or are we not? Are we going to have, you know, how are we going to exploit our relationship with our partners to the south? Are we going to become a state for, you know, I mean, we just spent all this money.
Liability issues
That's
for
right.
space
I mean,
people,
there's so
all
many
that.
things.
Payments also.
Sure.
So I think that the governor is going to have to wrestle with, you know, where do you do that? And I think the million-dollar question for lots of governors has been, I think they all get in their room with their friends and their colleagues, whether they're Republicans or Democrat, and they all have, you know, I jokingly have said it's kind of like the alien deal. You know, they all become president, and they get in the room, they want to know what really happened in Roswell, then they never say anything afterwards. They all want to make jobs in New Mexico. They get in there with their friends, and they realize, man, it takes a lot of work. Let's go pick other fights to fight. So I think at the end of the day, the governor's going to have to make a decision. I think what she's going to have to be prepared for, though, is Kenny Martinez is a smart guy. Kenny Martinez and I came into the legislature together. We did Megan's Law together. Kenny Martinez is going to make sure that there's legislation that gets to her desk that if she doesn't sign it, there could be some problems for her. So she's going to have to figure out how to build that relationship, because Kenny Martinez is extremely articulate, extremely smart. He's the son of a former Speaker of the House. He knows how the game is played up there, and there may be nobody more prepared to lead the Democrats in the House and maybe the legislature than a guy like Kenny. The question is, how do you build that relationship? I will say this, Kenny is as liberal as they come, but he's also a relationship guy, and he'll listen. And so if they reach out to him, there could be this opportunity to work together. But if they draw a line in the sand, I'm not sure they have a chance to win that
I'm telling
battle.
you right now, this is a beautiful opportunity for Democrats, because if somebody draws a line in the sand about jobs, it can almost show up this administration about what they haven't been doing thus far. They're going to be on the wrong side of this thing, and they're going to be playing catch up. We'll see how it happens. When we return, the struggle for statehood here as New Mexico celebrates its 100th anniversary as part of this good old US of A.